Aaron. I'm the Dean of Students at Middle School here at Salesian College in Shanton. Today we're having a conversation with Associate Professor Shanton. He's from the University of Melbourne from the School of Computing and Info Systems. We all know the current environment is really challenging with the COVID situation, and our interactions with technology has increased significantly. So today we'll be having a chat about the concept of digital journeys, digital natives, and echo chambers. A little bit more about that later, but particularly with an emphasis on online safety, self-identity for students and their expectations with using technology. This is another opportunity for us to have another one of our virtual conversations with experts in the field, people who are, I guess, for a lack of a better word, far more qualified and able to provide us insights into areas that the school can support you and your children with. And today, before I introduce my guest for today for our conversation, I wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge the current climate that we're living in at the moment. And look, the COVID-19 pandemic has made life difficult. I think that's probably putting it lightly. And also empathizing with our families as well, that unfortunately some families have had significant change in, say, financial circumstances. So we're not going to sit here and say again, as I did in the past, and if I've spoken to you in person before, that I'm not going to say I understand how you feel, but I think I can say that we certainly empathize as a school, that we can support you to the best of our abilities, because ultimately what we want is for the young person or for the student to get the most out of his education. So enough of that waffling on from me. I wanted to take this opportunity now to introduce Shanton, Associate Professor Shanton Chang. He's from the University of Melbourne. He's the Associate Dean International at the School of Computing and Info Systems, currently there. He's presented both locally and internationally as well, and I'll share in a little bit about how I actually, how this conversation came about in a minute. But the conversation today is going to be centered on the topic of digital journeys, digital natives, online learning, and talk a little bit about how our young people, our children now, and our students are engaging with the online space. And we all know that with the current pandemic, everything's online. Our reliance on technology has increased significantly compared to how it's been previously. And I will say this as well. Look, my first experience of listening to Shanton talk was at the ProPsych Mental Health in Schools conference last year at the Melbourne Exhibition and Convention Centre. And I think there were about, from memory, 120, 130 or so, I think, people there, and about 10 to 15 or so other presenters. And look, Shanton's presentation was brilliant, and I was really, really keen to get him back in. So Shanton, I'll throw over to you if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I don't know about being an expert, but I think one of the key things in this space is that it's such a complex area. It's moving so fast, and that research is continually needed to understand online behaviors, and also what the technology is doing, because that's also evolving. If you're probably feeling at home that it's really hard to keep up with what's going on, and every time there's a new technology, there's a new pattern of behavior that we have to try and understand. So I think one of the challenge is trying to understand the evolving nature of the space that we're working in, particularly with teenagers and young people moving very fast as well. And so this is where I think there are some fundamentals that we can walk through and think through as we try to grapple with the current pandemic and the increased reliance on these technologies.
Yeah, I suppose, Shanton, I think we all know that technology is such an important part of our life. And I know that we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but, our reliance on technology as well, the expectations of kids when or not just kids, but adults, but this is focused on kids, with regards to how they engage one another, their self-identity in the online space, and what it is they're, I guess, trying to project to their peers and to the outside world. Before we dive into the first question, I want to sort of just draw on a little experience that I've had here at the college, is that in the last few years when I was Year 7 coordinator, previous to my current role, one of the questions we ask the guys when we're doing this a bit of a laptop boot camp, so we give them their laptops, guys, this is, your thing, I think we assume sometimes incorrectly that kids will just somehow know how to use this thing, right? We'll give them this thing and they'll just do it. And we asked the kids the question of, hey guys, how many of you guys have a parent that asks you about your computer, how to do something on the computer? Okay, so most of the kids will go, yeah, okay. And how many of you guys tell them just enough information to sort of get rid of them, but don't tell them the whole story? And every single hand usually goes up. So I'm not suggesting for a second that that parents and adults are not able to use computers, I guess, in that sense.
But kids are smart, aren't they, Shanton? I think they know a lot. And I think you talked about this term as digital natives, right? And that was intriguing. But would you be able to talk to us a little, what is a digital native?
Look, I think that even the person who coined the term, Mark Prensky, the digital native, has tried to distance himself from it by saying that there's really no such thing. Because the assumption of a digital native is that there's a bunch of people who know what they're doing. And the reality is that not many people actually know exactly what they're doing. They know a few things about what they're doing, but there's a lot more that they do not know. And so this idea of a digital native and assuming that this is their territory and that this is their space. And then we start to create this myth, that when it comes to technology, the kids have their own space and it's their space, and the adults have our own space and it's our space, and they should not be corrupted or interacting in a sense. And therefore, what happens is you start to have parents thinking, oh, it's their space. I know nothing about it. It's too difficult to try and invade their space. And for the kids, it's almost becoming more protective of their space. This is where we know adults are not comfortable coming in. And so we're just going to keep them at arm's length. And so I think that it isn't always useful to use the term digital natives. I think we are all learning to use the technology, and the technology is ever changing, as I started saying earlier on. So this idea that there's actually a huge diversity in the way that people engage with technology. Even if you look at a simple, very common platform like Facebook, I can tell you that if you have 300 kids, there's probably at least 50 different ways that the kids engage with Facebook, different levels of usage, different types of things that they're looking at, different ways that they're using the Facebook, and what sort of news is coming to them depending on their social network and who they're networking with, how much adult content there is in terms of mature discussion around politics, for example, versus sharing of food pictures. It's all very different, and there's a huge diversity. And so I think if we start to break that down a little bit and say, look, okay, we know that kids love technology and they want to take to it like fish to water, if I may say, right? That doesn't make them a digital native. It just means that they are the first movers in. They are the fastest to try something out. That doesn't mean that as adults, we can't be in there and looking at what they're doing and asking them for advice, and also having that open conversation around, wow, how would you do that? Is there a possible way to do this? And then that makes us all more on a level playing field of exploring together. I think that's really important.
I think it's well, and you've touched on a few points there, Shanton. I remember listening to you speak at the conference last year, and I remember thinking as you were talking about, I know you,
without going into too much detail on that side, and we'll sort of delve into that a little bit later, but to talking about getting people to reflect upon how we interact with technology. And I know you put a bit of a joke there, and I sort of remembered it as well, talking about Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat, all these sorts of platforms, and I know we talk about this concept of a digital journey, and I think we're all learning about that along the way. And we've touched on that idea of, what we think we know as opposed to what we actually know.
And the way we seek our information. Would you be able to talk to us a little bit, Shanton? I know you sort of mentioned it a bit there as well, but the roles that some students can play, particularly like now in this online space, right? They've been given a lot of, not say freedom, but they've been given a lot of opportunity to make use of this resource. The way that they engage in technology, I think sometimes we can say that it can be somewhat, not say dangerous, I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, but it can be somewhat risky. But because it's not as, I guess, apparent as opposed to, say, walking across the street when a bus is coming or cars are coming, would you be able to talk to us a little bit about how kids may potentially engage the online space that might be a little bit risky for them and how we deal with that?
I think to look at that, I think we need to go back to fundamentals of the reality that most human beings, including our teenagers, tend to go to their 10 favorite websites or social media platform. And most of us are quite happy in that 10, maybe 15 maximum. In fact, some people say, actually, I only have 7. Right? That's not a lot. Considering that there are millions of websites and social media platforms and other sorts of technology out there, most people use their favorite, what I call bundle of technology and platforms and websites. It's their source of information, their source of interaction online. So it's a very comfortable bundle that we go to every week, multiple times. We might visit each site at least 6 or 7 times a week, and it's the same ones that we keep going to. That's the first thing to be aware of. Most of us do that. If you count yourself, your work email, your personal email, that's 2, then your own website, and then your news website, your favorite 2 or 3 social media platforms, that's 7, a couple more news websites, and your hobbies and particular platforms that you go to, you can't even reach 20, right? These are the sites that we go to all time and then time again. Then we talk about digital journeys as what happens when you move to a new environment. It could be you have shifted to a new suburb, you have moved from Shepparton to Melbourne, or you've become an expat to live in Japan for a year. What new additional information do you start to build into your bundle? What new digital journeys do you make beyond the physical journey that you make? And in the same way, sometimes you don't actually have to make a physical journey to make a digital journey. As you discover a new hobby, for example, you'll start to Google new things, new keywords, and that will open up a new section of the digital environment for you, right? So these are all digital journeys. So what does that have to do with teenagers? Teenagers are always exploring. Okay, we all know that. Even before the days of the internet, if we think of the days when we were teenagers, there'll be certain places that we will hang out with our friends, right? But occasionally, there'll be a fresh new idea that says, hey, instead of going to Chadstone, why don't we go a bit further out? Let's go to Southland, for example, and hang out and watch the movie there instead of going to, Chadstone every weekend, sort of idea. So in the internet space, that happens as well. And this is at the point where, on the one hand, we want to encourage students to explore because there are millions of really positive and constructive websites. But on the other hand, you could go down a dark path, as you say, risky behavior. And this is where also you've got peers, right? And if you reflect back to your days pre the internet, a lot of these new paths is a function of your parents' influence, your peers' influence, your teachers' influence. So in the same way, when you look at the online space, those influences still matter. The difference is that you can do it from the same laptop, right? And so then it means that the way that we have conversations around those movements and those journeys has to change. And it shouldn't change by us stopping the journey. It should change by us having more open conversations about the journeys, right? And one of the challenges there, of course, is students who are not sure about what it means, and the younger they are, the more difficult it is. And so what it means is that we need to actually build trust from the very beginning, right? If they were using iPads on their own from the time when they were 7 years old and we left them alone, you can't then jump in when they are 12 years old to say, now I want to have a conversation, because they've never had a conversation with you. It becomes very suspicious when you try to invade that space. And so this is where I say it's an opportunity for those of you with younger kids when they are starting to use the technology to actually be part of their journey as well. So that by the time they get to the teenage years, it's not so strange. It doesn't feel like you're invading their space because that conversation has been happening already. Does that make sense?
It does. Oh, absolutely. And if I could jump in there, Shanton, and ask you, because one of the questions I was thinking of as you were talking, and you sort of answered it as well along the way, was, if I'm the parent that's sitting here, and this is certainly not my personal experience, but let's say, for example, if you're the sort of parent that's not you either, say,
Yes.
Assuming that, say, there's been parents that have been in there, not say their whole lives, but, might be not necessarily as familiar with the use of technology just by virtue of circumstance, maybe because the job that they do may, for example, just not require it. And now all of a sudden, we're in this situation where we've got, all right, teachers are saying, hop online, log into Teams, you've got to check your emails, you've got to do X, Y, Z, you've got to use Google Forms and blah, 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 all these things. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, these parents are now, maybe say working from home as well, or say not working or whatever. And they're now in this situation where they're trying to supervise and support their sons, in our context anyway, their sons to do their classes. But because they've never had that, and I'm not suggesting they haven't had the trust, but how would you advise, in your opinion, and what advice could you provide parents and guardians to say, right, I haven't had this experience. how do I go about doing this, knowing that, let's be honest, my kid knows a lot more about this than I do? What can they do?
Yeah. Look, I think that's a very good question. The first thing that I want to say is that, given half the chance, I mean, teenagers love to show that they know more than their parents. Right? Anyone who has encountered or has been a teenager would know that, right? To show that they're smarter than their parents because they're so wise, apparently. So, and that's fine. And technology is one of those spaces where I think it's important to actually let them take the lead. And this might sound a bit controversial, but if we think that the students actually know more than we do, then let them take the lead, and we are the guide on the side asking questions. It's a bit like this. I always call it the Saturday sports day, right? If your son is playing soccer and you want to support him, but you yourself know that you will never be a soccer player yourself. So you're not an expert, whereas your son has been training week in and week out playing soccer. So you're not about to tell him that you know how to play soccer, unless you're, which you're not. So there are a few rules when you go to a Saturday soccer game, right? Firstly, you don't run onto the pitch when the game is happening, when the interaction is happening. As a parent, even if there's something happening on the pitch that you don't agree with, you deal with it later on and you talk to them later on. If there's something you don't agree with about the coach, you talk to the coach a bit later on. Also, you don't try to give advice to your son about how to play soccer when soccer is his area and not yours. Even if you were an AFL fan and you've played AFL before, you're still not a soccer aficionado. So in the same way, when you look at technology, if you see something that's happening on Facebook, an interaction between peers, talking about particular issue, the worst thing we could do as adults is to jump into that conversation while they are having that conversation and interfering with it, because that's the best way to get blocked. That's the best way to break trust, right? Have a conversation with him offline. Hey, I saw that happening. Now I'm just curious, why did that happen? What do you think happened? And what do you think could have been done if it could have been done better? Now tell me, why does this thing keep happening, right? That's the conversation you have in soccer after the game on your way home to Macca's or wherever. And in the same way, you have that conversation offline and ask and put your child in the driver's seat of they know what they're doing. Our job is to moderate and mitigate it and insert our wisdom into the conversation.
That sounds really good. It does, absolutely. And I think there's so many questions as well that are coming out from that as well, being able to guide. And I like the analogy of using the Saturday sports to say that, you can watch from afar, you don't jump into that position and be able to sort of try to take over and walk that journey with the kid. If I could sort of bring it to a bit of a specific example for our particular context, understanding that, every school or every workplace, every environment is going to be slightly different. But, I'll give you an example. So, for example, we've got a family who's gone, right, my son, hypothetically, has been getting in a bit of trouble at school. So, he's been posting some dodgy stuff, for lack of a better word, on Instagram. He's DMing other people. Again, we've made the assumption that people understand what that term is, but he's talking to people who I don't know. I'm concerned now that his behavior is going to be risky. I don't see it. And I want to build trust with my kid and to guide him through this process. You mentioned a little bit there about mitigating and managing the risks. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what are some of the potential risks that can come about from, say, for example, a parent going, "Oi, what are you doing? Give me your phone and show me everything." Or what are some of the issues there?
Yeah, one of the things that I learned very quickly when I started doing this research, even in the early days, when I say early days, I mean 2005, okay, 15 years ago. One of the very quick things that we found, and this was also the early days when governments were and organizations were starting to give parents advice on how to parent in the digital age. And one of the biggest mistakes that is well acknowledged now is if you ask your child for their password, they're just going to create another account. where you don't have the password and they go underground, and you don't want that, right? If you insist that your child is also your friend on Facebook, then they'll also create another Facebook page. If you then kind of catfish them, by that I mean you take on a different persona to pretend to be their friend, none of those actions are particularly good ways of building trust with your teenager, if you don't mind my saying, right? So apologies to those of you who are doing it, but the research is showing that the kids are smarter than us, the technology, and they'll find a way around it, right? The only way you're going to stop this if you take the mobile phone away. That's like taking one of their limbs away from them, because a lot of them would have been using it from a very long time ago, from when they were a lot younger. Right? So it's almost an extension of who they are in a sense. And of course, that becomes a very powerful punishment, if you like, quite punitive in their eyes, and not something that you would want to do every month, right? It has to be pretty serious for you to get to that stage. That means that in terms of how we mitigate that, currently the Australian government, we have an e-safety website that people can look at. And it's very easy, esafety.gov.au. And there's a whole section there for parents and carers of children to keep them safe. And you know, I could go on and talk about it a lot, but the reality is there's some really well-researched strategies about how to have those conversations, right? And the conversations usually start not in relation to the technology. The technology is kind of the second part of the conversation. The first part is, what is going on that's making you act out, right? It's not that you are doing it. The technology is like a tool through which they act it out. It's not because of the technology that they're doing it. Something is also driving them to use it. A lot of researchers in our field say the technology, the apps, the social media, it's all about choice. And what happens with that choice, with the technology and all that, is that it accentuates us. It lets us do what we want to do. It's an expression of who we are and how we want to engage with the rest of the world. So if there's a problem with the way that technology is being used, we start by talking about, so why did you want to say that to your friend, right? Not, let me have a look at your technology, you shouldn't be doing this in the technology, right? So I think having those broader conversations are actually very important. Then once you've worked on that, they say, you do realize that when you do that on the technology, everyone can see what you're doing, right? We have this term called the digital tattoo. You know, the idea that if you have a tattoo, it's really, 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 really hard to remove. A digital tattoo is the same thing. Even when you delete it, it is somewhere online and it can be traced back to you 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's a digital footprint that is not, you know, that is not easily removable. So then the technology conversation comes in then.
And I think that, and you know, I'm sure we all do it as well. Not say all do it, but I think most people would have an understanding potentially that whatever goes online, it doesn't disappear. And I think you've touched on it really nicely there. And I wanted to build on that as well, because we've talked about kids putting things online. And I sort of put it into the context here as well further. You know, we hear conversations of parents saying to us at school, oh, I've told them that that's not a good idea. You know, don't say anything or don't put anything, online that you wouldn't say to someone in person. You know, there's I guess, not necessarily a handbook in terms of appropriate statements to make, I guess, in that sense. But what we're getting here is that we understand that the crux of it, or the root issue here, is to build trust between the parent and their kids. If we flip it a little bit further, Shanton, if we can sort of talk about this, that, you know, inevitably you probably will get some kids within our school community who may eventually hop onto this video and go, oh, so I'm going to work out now what my mum and dad have been told, and try to take that one step further. Also understanding at the same time that, as we've acknowledged, kids are really good with technology. Have you got any advice for kids or younger people, I guess, and so teenagers rather, where they may have a parent that may be approaching him, and without just saying, you know, you've got to trust your parents, have you got any advice for younger people who may be approached and find themselves in a situation where their space is being encroached upon and they feel a little bit uncomfortable?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really difficult one, but I often say to, because I do go out to schools and sometimes talk to the younger kids who ask me this question, you know, my parents are trying to control me. And it's true. I mean, there has never, I mean, the news is this, there has never been a generation of teenager that hasn't felt that their parents are trying to control them. So it's not very different from the dawn of human civilization till now. Okay, you are just, the next generation feeling that pressure. And one of the things that I have to say though is that I think that they might not understand what you're going through, and you might feel that, and that's a valid feeling. But I think one of the things is sometimes it's good to check in if you're not sure, because most of us, even when we are teenagers, even when you're a teenager, you know that when you are doing something and something is not quite right, right? You have a gut feeling and you have an instinct. You are all smart kids, right? I mean, the fact that you got to school and you are at this level means you're a smart kid. You will all have a gut feeling that, okay, something is not quite right. I'm not sure if this is quite the right thing to do. If you're not comfortable talking to your parents, do a bit of research, right? Online, to think, have other people done this before? And you might call me an old fuddy-duddy for saying, who does that? Who has the time to do it? And that is the biggest trap. I tell you what's the difference between a teenager and adults, all right? And that is how quick you are to action. Okay, those of you, by the time you hit 20, 21, 22, you start to slow down. And by slow down, everything you're about to do, you take another extra 30 seconds to a minute to think about, do I really want to do this? When you're a teenager, you are just going to do it, right? Live a little, just go for it. And that is the biggest difference between adulting and teenagers, okay? And so one of the things that I say to the students is, have a think about it before you do it, right? If you want to complain about something, if you want to say something about someone, if you want to post a photo of someone, just spend a few seconds just thinking, what are the consequences and what are the issues, right? Before anything else, before you have to, if you don't want to be having that awkward conversation with your parents, really, you can have that awkward conversation with yourself and spare yourself a lot of pain. And that's not to say you should self-censor at all. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that have a think about it, because even adults sometimes make the mistake of pushing the send button too fast, right? And that's the biggest trap of the internet. If you don't want to be having that awkward conversation with your parents and to explain it, then maybe that's a good place to start.
Yeah, thanks for that one too. I think it's also, again, with regards to impulsivity, I think with kids being able to respond very quickly. And I think it's really important to say as well, for the boys, when you guys, if you're watching this as well, to be mindful as well at the same time, that it's not an opportunity for us to turn around and go, hey, look, listen, we know that you're doing stuff that's a little bit dodgy. And we're going to try to, obviously try to mitigate those issues and try to support you and to give you a reasoning as to why that may not be a good idea. But it's not necessarily about controlling what you're trying to do. It's about educating and getting you to understand that there's always consequences to certain actions. Now, I think we were talking about it there as well, and you mentioned, alluded to the idea of identity as well, potentially how kids are putting themselves out there too. Now, I am not suggesting, and I think we all know, like I've got an Xbox headset on me at the moment. You look at avatars, for example. People create these, characters online, or there's all sorts of things out there where kids have the opportunity, not kids, but people have the opportunity to personalize the way they look. And I think there is that concern about what expectations do kids have when they're putting themselves out there into an open space. And I want to just, before I throw the question to you, Shanton, if that's all right, I want to put it in a way where the kids, when you guys are listening to this too, we're not suggesting that, you're Bruce Wayne and Batman. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that you're going to be, the Cape Crusader. But what we're saying is that the way that you portray yourself online could be vastly different to how you are in reality. So I guess the question, it might be a bit of a long one here, though, Shanton, is that with kids who are putting themselves out there and understanding that you don't want to put all your personal information out there, but of course, at the same time, you also don't want to say, like if you're a 13-year-old boy, for example, you don't want to put out, I'm 25 years old, whatever, How do we balance that? How do we balance a kid's ability to share information, but not overshare to the point that he becomes at risk?
All right, there are a few ways to look at this, because it depends on the context, right? If you are So I'm going to do the easier one. And that is, if you choose to remain anonymous, that's a great option to interact with people that you do not know. And there are many platforms where you can do that. And you can use what we call a true avatar. That means a representation of you that's nothing like you. If any of you are playing, games, online games, whether it's Minecraft or World of Warcraft, and I have to admit, I'm one of those people who do that. You can play someone that is not a representation of you at all. I think that's one way that people interact. And then once, and I think that's where you can protect yourself. On the other hand, in some platforms, you kind of have to say your name, right? And who you are a bit more. With that, there are a few things to be aware of. The technology is moving really fast. And so everyone, not just teenagers, but also parents and teachers have to be aware of this. That in our society, there are a few ways that you are identified for who you are, right? Your identity is absolutely crucial. Your identity is determined by a few key factors. Number one, who you are is determined by what you look like. So there's facial recognition technology out there. That's the first one. Secondly, your date of birth. One of the most confidential thing. Even if you want to share your birthday, don't share the year, even though that's actually very easy to find out, especially if we know that you're in year 9 in which class, right? So already there are 2 pressure points that we can identify you very quickly for who you are and where you are. So you just need to be aware of that anyone can track you down, right? The third thing is your address, right? The thing that you should never share online is your address, okay? And you should never share your face, your date of birth, and your address all on the same platform. If it's a public platform on Facebook, please, for goodness sake, never put that on your Facebook, right? And then key defining things around, whether you have brothers and sisters, where your parents work, anything that can narrow you down, that exposes not just you, but the people you love and the people around you, okay? And your friends as well will be open to this, because a lot of people who target attacking and hackers are not just randomly hacking. They actually do their research very well. They can actually map out who are your best friends and all that by looking at your very public Facebook, for example. They can, so all it takes is the weakest point, and it can lead to a whole range of networks. Now, I'm not trying to say this out of fear. I'm explaining how the technology works and how social media analysis works. And this is how, when you open up Facebook the next time, when you see an ad that is so targeted at you, how do you think they know about it? Because they've got your data, right? And so the more of that private data that you put online, the more likely it is that people can tell who you are better than you know yourself. And this is something that we are all learning to work with and deal with. And we might think it's not important, but we've had situations a few years ago where a student actually said in her Facebook, isn't it great that I live in a space where, I can go to the beach, Brighton Beach, and walk by myself every day from between 6:30 and 7, and there's no one here to bother me. And then she's got her picture on there and everything. She's basically told everyone, the whole world of strangers, where she's going to be every day from 6:30 to 7 o'clock and who she is, right? Those are the things that you might not think when you are pressing send is important, but people piece it together across time. And that's why we have these conversations. That's why we say, protect yourself, protect the people that you love.
I think there's also, sorry to cut you off there, Shanton. I think that there's a bit of a lag there, sorry. But I guess also on top of that too, and I've heard this as well, I can't remember who told me this as well, but there was, I think this was actually not so much the kids. And again, for the boys who are listening to this at home, and I'm not suggesting that the parents in this sense, you are intentionally, I'm guessing there'd be some parents on this as well listening going, oh gosh, okay, I didn't know this and that and whatnot. But also at the same time, I did hear a while ago as well that there was a family, I think they were going overseas, I can't remember exactly where, but they checked in at the airport and said, hey, off to Thailand or whatever it is. someone ended up burgling their house. And now
Yeah.
obviously there's linked information there as well in terms of how they got that information. But I think take it a step further, I believe, the insurance company, I don't know what the technical terms are, but what they refused to pay them out, obviously, because in their view, they had exposed or provided some information through the digital space that said, hey, I'm not here. So I guess we're moving on from that as well, understanding as well now that there's a rapidly changing environment with regards to technology and understanding it's one of those things that changes very quickly too. We talked about managing conversations and the trust between the parents and the students, I guess, or their sons in our context. I wanted to ask you as well, Shanton, with regards to the current climate. If we looked at the COVID climate specifically, and we've been alluding to this and saying, we were spending so much more time now on our computers.
Mm-hmm.
To the parents and the students who are sort of just waiting, and at the time of recording this, I'm assuming people are going to be looking further. It's the 4th of September, so it's Friday, 2 days out from now. Daniel Andrews will be announcing probably some more information, and I'm not sure how relevant this will be. But looking at this and saying, okay, we've got a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, however long. With regards to the however long we're going to be in these restrictions, and to the parent who's sitting there going, oh gosh, how much longer am I going to have to deal with this? In that sense, understanding as well that there's so much information out there. What's your advice if there's a tangible action, something that parents could do? Say the moment they finished watching this, go, okay, I probably need to have this conversation. What's your advice to that parent? What's the first thing they've got to do?
I know that a lot of parents are really worried about too much screen time, and that's a valid worry. All of us are having too much screen time right now, right? And I think one of the challenges there is to then assume that the teenagers are having more screen time than we are, and therefore it's not healthy. I think there's screen time, and then there's, downloading time and relaxation time, right? So you can be spending time on the screen and engaging with your studies. I think one of the key things is, and it varies from school to school, I think some of the key things is that the way that a lot of schools are structured in terms of the studies is to modularize things. You just have to get certain things done on certain day. It doesn't tell you that everyone has to be on from 9 to 4, for example, right? That means that you could actually schedule some off-screen time somewhere in between that and stretch out the day a little bit in terms of, okay, actually at 3 o'clock, mom and dad, who's also working from home, is also going to take a coffee break, and you're also going to take a break, and we're just going to sit around and have a chat over something, right? Or every day, one of you will bring something interesting from YouTube or Instagram to show everyone and talk about it. It's just kind of like depressurizing, using screen or not using screen, but to have very clear time sets as a family of, okay, between this time and this time, that's what we're going to do. And this is what you're going to do. You're going to do your, and we're going to respect your privacy, but make sure that you don't try and jump onto YouTube between 9 and 10 where you just need to get this done. After that, you can do whatever you want for an hour or whatever. So I think carving up kind of, and it will be different from family to family, right? Because it'll be different from kid to kid. Everyone has different attention span. We can't assume that everyone's going to be the same. So whatever maximizes and optimizes the experience of the family, where people can do their own thing, do their own work or study their own stuff, and also coming together, whether it's with screen or without screen, or saying, okay, pants down, everything down, we're all going to watch Netflix and for an hour, okay? And today you get to choose, tomorrow I get to choose, or whatever, and we're all going to, do it together or whatever. I think you have to think of screen time as I guess, not one continuous thing, but you are doing different things with it. It could be playing games, it could be watching something, it could be finding something new, or it could be doing your work. And they are all very different exercises that kickstarts different parts of your brain. I think that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think that from what we're hearing too is, and just to echo this into, again, a little bit more the context that we've got here, as well as compartmentalising and organising your time, I guess, and getting kids to say, hey, look, for example, I can't, and as you said, every family situation is different. Contextualising that for the individual group, obviously it would depend on, whether mum and dad are both working at home, whether or not one's away, one's at home, whatever it is. And I think that that's really important as well for kids to understand, so boys at home to understand. that, you know, you get your timetable during the day. You know, every teacher is going to say to you, we want you to do this, 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 and this. We understand, absolutely. But also understanding we've got to be able to have a time in there. And you know, this is not me saying you go to mum and dad and say, this is what, you know, Mr. Chen said on the interview. No, I didn't say that. But, you know, being able to have that opportunity to go maybe between, I don't know, I'm making this up, 6 and 7 or whatever. This is a time where you get to go play Fortnite or whatever it is that people are playing. In terms of that as well, though, I guess with parents who have that conversation with their kids and say, all right, we'll give you this, we'll set up the structure. Is there in your experience, Shanton, is there a way that maybe over a given period of time, because some parents will go, all right, great, I'll do all this. But then they turn around and go, well, how do I know this is really working? How do I know that he's not just, you know, playing and he's, you know, he's saying he's there for an hour? How do I know he hasn't got this running in the background somewhere, you know, like, you know, the multiple windows trick that, you know, kids have? Well, how do we, I guess, not regulate that, but how do parents know that their compartmentalizing has actually had a measure of success?
That's a question that I don't have an answer for, unfortunately, because otherwise, every teenager in the world would hate me.
Okay.
The reality is that this comes back down to trust, right? This comes back down to trust, and this comes back down to the students actually knowing that, look, our brains can do many things and multitask, but we can't sustain it for long periods of time. You know, all of it will come back down to us being able to manage the workload as well. And if you want to maintain that trust, and I think then you need to have that open conversation. So I really don't have an answer other than it's really important to have that trust and that open conversation.
I think it's also,
this is where,
sorry, go. No, you go. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I think this is where, as students, you know, even if the temptation, I know it's great to jump on to do something else, but don't let that take over your lives. I mean, like, you know, you if you want the trust, you kind of have to earn it, right? And for the parents, if you try to jump on and surprise your child every hour or so, I mean, that's another way of not building trust. So it's really difficult. It's a difficult one.
I know you did say that, Shanton, that you didn't really have an answer for it, but I think to a certain extent here, I think that was a good answer in that sense, because, you know, ultimately at the very beginning, you know, right from when the boys started at school, and again, this is specific to our context here at Salesian and Shanton, is that, you know, we always talk about this idea of building a partnership, or sort of three-way partnership between the school, the parents, and the kid. And, you know, understanding as well that, you know, those of you who have been here for a little bit longer, so boys who might be year 11, year 12, are just, you know, on the way out and nearly finished, you know, you probably have the benefit of hindsight in that you've learned now from your experiences that, hey, all these times in the past when teachers and parents have been on your back, but providing you an opportunity to go, hey, look, we're going to walk your journey here, make your mistakes, but at the same time, realize that we're here to support you. And that relationship building and trust in that's really important. And, you know, to the boys, if you're listening to this as well, you know, ultimately what I'm saying is that, you know, mom, dad, whatever the setup is at home, and your teachers here at school, what we're actually here to do is actually to provide you guys the opportunity to make your own mistakes, but also to learn your own lessons, but also trust in us to so-called say, hey, you know what, maybe mum and dad and our teachers actually know something here. And it's not about controlling our lives, but they're concerned about making sure that you make the best decisions possible. And we talked about those digital footprints and everything, sorry, not digital footprints, the data in the space that, like, you post something on the internet and you delete it and whatnot. And look, Shanton, I'm just mindful of time as well. And as I said, I'm really appreciative of your time in supporting us here. But I did have one final question, I guess, for you in terms of just summarizing and wrapping this up. And also understanding as well that, you know, the pandemic at this point of recording, a time of recording anyway, we haven't got an end time. And I think, you know, we don't really know for sure, and that uncertainty is out there. And ironically, that uncertainty is almost the only certainty we have, is that we know that we're not sure when this is going to end. In terms of this idea of dealing with technology, and I know that there'll be some parents out here now going, okay, there's further information. You've mentioned some of the resources that you're talking about before, but have you got any, I guess, you know, advice to the parents, and understanding there's a whole, you know, spectrum, I guess, in terms of understanding, you know, trusted sites, because, you know, we talk about misinformation, don't we? There's so much information out there, then how come some people are still not informed? What's the best, in your opinion, the best websites or the best sources of information for parents who are going out there trying to find information about being able to support their sons in the digital space?
Okay, I mean, we're very lucky here in Australia because the e-safety commission is very well supported and very well supported by research and practitioners and teachers and parents and even young people, right? So the esafety.gov.au is a great website to go to. There's also resources there on cyberbullying and all that sort of stuff. And one of the key things about cyberbullying, if I can mention very quickly, is that sometimes you don't even know you are actually committing the act of bullying online just because of the things that you say online. And so that's actually a good resource actually to understand what you're doing and the implications of what you're doing to your friends and your peers as well. And for parents to understand how even their nicest kids sometimes can inevitably cause what might be seen as bullying to some other peers, for example. So the esafety.gov.au is a great one. There's another organization that has a great website with a lot of information for young people and understanding not just e-safety and how to deal with technology, but for their future and their careers of the future. That's the Foundation for Youth of Australia, FYA. If you Google Foundation for Youth Australia, you'll get the website, and there's a lot of fantastic resources around the kind of skills that are important. What I call, because I'm from computing and information systems, I need to talk about this a little bit. What we call digital skills, and that's not necessarily just about programming, right? But also understand how technology is used to help organizations, to help not-for-profits, to help the church, to help not-for-profit sectors, but also the banks and all that sort of stuff. And even understanding how you can integrate technology into your life better. So there's some great resources that you can have a look at and that are very reliable and well-researched and supported.
I think we're so, and that's the thing with me. Look out there as well. I think from your presentation, I know it's not word for word when you mentioned this last year, but there was something along those lines of saying, well, if we can all Google, we can all research, and there's so much information out there, how come there still appears to be so much misinformation? And that's why I really wanted to get your opinion and advice with regard to reliability. And looking at,
I always say that opinions are not facts. I think the biggest danger that we have in today's world is people think that their opinions are facts, and you have the right to an opinion, but you don't have the right to your own facts. I think that's really important for you as students, and those of you who are in year 11 and 12. If you don't know your facts, you just can't just give an opinion and expect to get a high score. You know that as a student, right? And this is something that some adults seem to have forgotten around the world and think that opinions are facts. They're not. And I think that's really important. And so a lot of things we talk about are skills and managing to compartmentalize your time and managing your IT skills and your use of technology are skills that are going to stand you in good stead when you come to university. Because once you hit university, no one's going to be watching over your back to make sure you're on Microsoft Teams rather than Minecraft. But if you keep missing the lectures, you will pay for it in the results.
I think that's a really, oh, sorry, but I think that's a really good point there. I think to remind everyone as well, particularly to the boys here. So again, there's not, and I know that it's not intending to sound condescending in any way, but absolutely. And what I was going to say really is that, you guys will be going to, those of you in year 12, the large majority of you guys will be looking at going to, in year 11 too, but year 12 is closer. You'd be going to university very soon, and some of you may end up in the University of Melbourne, who might actually, I don't know, maybe you end up in Shanton's classes, I don't know. But I think you've heard that there as well, that idea of putting the onus effectively onto you as a student to be able to effectively do the right thing has to be built on trust. And at the stage now, boys, you're looking at your parents here to support you, your teachers here to support you, and I'll openly say this, and those of you who've had me before in class, and I keep consistent, it seems like teachers are here to sort of, to sort of be the bad guy, but that's not really what it is. We're here to support you to make sure that you go towards making your right decision, because at the end of the day, it's your decision. It's your choice. We can't control what you do in that sense, but we can get you to reflect upon the actions that you've taken. And I think that there's a lot of really good techniques and little bits of information and strategy within this conversation there. And I guess the advice here from the angle on the end, before I throw to Shanton for closing comments here, is that, as a school, boys, if you guys need support, and parents as well, and, always reach out to your teachers. we're here to support you. Reach out to your year level coordinators, reach out to myself or Mr. Burrs in the senior school as well. And we look at these ideas of being able to form those relationships built on trust. And that is really important, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's about you guys and making sure that you guys get the most out of your high school experience. So Shanton, did you have any sort of, again, thank you for your time. I know that you're really busy, really appreciate it. Did you have any closing comments or anything that you wanted to communicate to either the boys or the parents, considering the current climate, as before they hop onto, the computers again on Monday or on the weekend,
Yes.
and do whatever it is they're going to do?
I think there's just one final thing, and that is, I think it's important to recognize that everybody is a bit different, and everybody has different attention span, and different preferences, and different ways of engaging with technology, and different ways that they study. What's really important is for each of you, the boys, to actually find the one that works really well for you. Right? And figure that out. The sooner you figure that out, the greater your life is going to be, honestly, in terms of how you balance the need for relaxation, the need for interaction, peer support, and also to get the work done to achieve what you want to achieve. And there are different ways, like I've said earlier on. Some people like to do intensely, work for 6 hours and then not worry about it. Other people have short breaks all the time. And other people, even shorter, half an hour, they jump from subject to subject. All of you have to figure out what works best for you. And for the parents, I don't think you could do anything more than supporting them in exploring what is the best way that works optimally for them. And, to get them to try different ways of working that makes sense for them, that works for them, rather than putting what you've read from the latest guru or from the tiger moms of the USA saying this is how it's going to be done and every child is going to do it, right? So I think finding the optimal engagement with technology is important as we progress in this space.
Thanks very much, Shanton. And again, some great advice there. And I think that looking forward onto this, guys, to summarize the conversation, to reiterate the point, technology is here to stay. You can see that already. It's going to be here for the future. It will be here for, in some shape or form, all the way back from when technological evolution occurred, way back in, the times of the Australopithecus, let's put it that way. But thank you very much, Shanton, for providing us an insight into how it looks like currently in 2020. Again, just on behalf of the school as well, thank you again, Shanton, for your time. And look, we'll be in touch, I'm sure, in the future. And boys, those of you who do move on to Melbourne Uni at some point in the future, you can look up Shanton. He'll be there. Or,
Yep.
He'll be there. And I know you've been there for quite a number of years. So,
yes.
We appreciate your time. But thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, what a great conversation. Look, thanks again, everyone, for listening into that. I really hope that you guys got something out of that, particularly when you're engaging in the online space. Technology is here to stay, and both parents and students, again, remember we're in partnership here. To the boys, we're here to make sure that you guys get the most out of high school. Thanks, guys.